A firsthand perspective on how the high school experience has evolved through the eyes of a lifelong Central Indiana educator.
Now when the dean of school calls and wants to say little Johnny's in trouble, they want to go after the teacher, they want to go after the coach, they want to go after the counselor. And there's that lack of accountability.
Chuck Weisenbach has had a front row seat as a private school administrator for 4 decades. His take on vouchers.
I think public's the whole state. And I think parents have the right to choose where they want their child educated.
On getting teenagers ready for their next chapter in life.
Are we trying to prepare the child for the path, or are we trying to prepare the path for the child? If you're going to try and prepare the path for the child, they're never going to learn. They're going to be 25 years old and still trying to figure out, how do I overcome adversity? What we're trying to do is prepare the child for the path ahead.
A unique perspective on the state of secondary education in Indiana from the private school point of view. Our conversation next with Roncalli High School President Chuck Weisenbach. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Well, imagine in today's world being in the business of educating young, impressionable teenagers with social media and all of the other outside noise and pressures coming into play. It's not an easy task. So this week, we sit down with a veteran Central Indiana educator to get a better handle on what's going on and what dynamics are in play. And I'm pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by the president at Roncalli High School, Chuck Weisenbach. Chuck, thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast this week.
Gary, thank you very, very much to you and your team for all the great work you do.
Oh, you bet. Thank you. So, president, about 4 years, but you're no stranger to Roncalli. You were the principal there at Roncalli High School here in Indianapolis for 26 years. So you've got quite the institutional knowledge of what is a great institution here in Indianapolis.
It's been a good run. 26 years was a good run. The president's role is different. I tell people all the time, ask me after so long as principals, but the president's role, I tell people it's a different lens. It's definitely a different pace to the job and a different skill set. So it's been a good change of pace for me. I thoroughly enjoyed the principal's job a bunch, but I've enjoyed the transition as well.
We'll talk about the difference between, because I think most high schools, all high schools, have a principal, but I don't know that a whole bunch necessarily have a president's role. The difference between being the president of a high school and the principal.
Sure, that's a good question. So really, the format, the governance structure of a president and principal goes way back. Jesuit schools were probably some of the first schools to use it throughout the country. Archdiocesan schools here in the Archdiocese started to move in that transition probably about 30 some years ago. Primarily, I think, driven by a couple of things. As our facilities started to age, just more and more challenges. You couldn't have, as a principal, you couldn't be running the educational institution, observing classroom teachers, helping develop curriculum, and still being out making sure facilities were being tended to. So it's been about 3 decades of a transition. The principals, it's pretty simple in this way. The principal is responsible for the daily operations of the building. They still have full control over teachers, coaches, student council, anything that's academically or student related. That's the principal's position. For the president, we have 3 or 4 major responsibilities. Number 1 would be continued focus on the Catholic identity of our school and mission effectiveness. Number 2, and really a key piece of the puzzle, is long-term strategic planning. So we are responsible for a 3 to 5 year strategic plan that our board of directors oversees and holds me responsible for. And then thirdly would certainly be the financial stability of the school, which obviously relates to fundraising. So those are really the 3 windows by which my job rotates to. Not to say the principal doesn't have work those, but the principal really just kept abreast of those situations, but doesn't have direct responsibilities as it relates to fundraising.
Give us a thumbnail description, Chuck, because certainly people here in Central Indiana and beyond know of Roncalli, but we have listeners from really around the globe. Give us the thumbnail description of Roncalli High School.
Well, we've been around since 1916. It's an interesting history to our school. Sacred Heart High School was formed in 1916. First Catholic high school in the city of Indianapolis, just south of the downtown area. Unfortunately, the school is no longer there. The church is still there. It's a beautiful church, but the school is no longer there. So it operated from 1916 through many decades. Then in 1962, the facility that we're currently in was opened in 1962 as Chartrand High School. So on the south side of Indianapolis, you had two Catholic high schools, Sacred Heart and Chartrand. Then in 1967, Sacred Heart was renamed by the Archdiocese John F. Kennedy Memorial High School in honor of the late president. So you still had two Catholic high schools, Kennedy Memorial and Chartrand. And then the two schools merged in 1969. Kennedy Memorial, aka Sacred Heart Central, and Chartrand merged. And the students at that time selected the name Roncalli. So we've been Roncalli now for 56 years and continue to operate here on the south side. So I think, geographically, we represent much of south side, certainly go into Johnson County, tinges of Hancock County, a little bit of Shelby County. Our enrollment's been right at 1,100 now for, we're hovering anywhere from 1050 to 1150, somewhere in that range. Certainly places us as one of the two largest faith-based or non-public high schools in the state of Indiana.
That was a great history lesson. I did not know that history with Sacred Heart and some of the other things you mentioned there. And you should have, and you do have such a strong knowledge of history. You actually, I think, executive producer Teresa Ditton filled me in. You grew up literally in the shadow of the high school, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So this general neighborhood, south of the University of Indianapolis, this neighborhood started to be built in the late 50s, early 60s. So my parents built a home in 1960, and then the school was built in 1962. So this neighborhood, and really the high school became our neighborhood stomping grounds. We'd use the track for our bicycle races and so forth. But the whole neighborhood was late 50s, early 60s. So I grew up sneaking into games. We used the school campus as basically our playground. So it was a wonderful way to grow up at that time for sure.
You mentioned earlier Catholic identity. How do you go about that, maintaining that tradition, that sense of tradition that exists there at Roncalli? I think many Catholic institutions. Is it tougher to do that today in this modern era, if you will, with social media and the different ideals floating out there? Is that a tougher task? How do you go about that?
Gary, that might be the $1 million question, quite frankly. I mean, it's a great question. I'm going to try to answer it from two or three ways. I have a podcast similar to yours that I call A Few Minutes with the President that goes out each month. And just this week, our podcast featured on the generational aspect of our school. And I think the generational aspect pertains to almost Catholic schools around the country. So we met with a family who has 4 generations. Their grandfather graduated from Sacred Heart in 1926. And then the parents graduated from Chartrand in 1966. And then their parents graduated from Roncalli in 1993. And now they have kids here. So I think one of the key ways that Catholic schools have been able to maintain strong Catholic identity is just that generational aspect. We have a number of families here, and I'm sure it's true of Catholic schools around the city and the country, who are 4th generation. We don't think there are any 5th generation families, but here at Roncalli, I'm sure there could be elsewhere. So I think one way is that generational aspect, just passing down the traditions of the church and Catholic education. So that's one key piece of the puzzle. I think the second piece that you mentioned in today's society, which obviously it would be my perspective, this is just Chuck Weisenbach as a person, our society as a whole obviously slanting more towards a secularistic society. And we are a microcosm of society. Roncalli High School is a microcosm of that. I tell people all the time, we're not a perfect high school. There is no such thing. But that secularism certainly finds its way into our hallways and into our classrooms. So what I've told our faculty and staff is this: we have to push back as hard or harder than that tsunami of secularism. If you don't push back as hard or harder, you're going to end up downstream someday and you wake up and say, oh my goodness, how did we get here? Mm-hmm. So a key piece of the puzzle, Gary, is so important, is that we have to push back harder than the tsunami of secularism. Otherwise, we will lose that Catholic identity. And Catholic identity is not meant to be elitist in any way, shape, or form. It just simply says, this is a school that chooses to be faith-based. I tell people all the time, Gary, we are strong public school supporters at Roncalli. What our society needs, what our city needs, what our state needs, and what our country needs is a strong public school system that is also then supported by faith-based schools, private schools, homeschools, and online schools. So that's a key piece of the puzzle. So we have to, and it can't just be, I guess the other piece of the puzzle that I would say, Gary, is we can't just leave that up to our theology department. So again, obviously one thing that's significantly different at Roncalli than our surrounding public schools is our kids are involved in the theology classes daily, which obviously you wouldn't find that in your traditional public school. But you can't leave it just to the theology teachers. The math teachers, the social studies teachers, your tennis coaches, your soccer coaches, your student council, everything that the school does has to come through the lens of a Catholic identity. Otherwise, it will begin to erode.
Yeah. And when you talk about that pushback and standing up for those values, that tradition, how tough is that sometimes? I mean, just to do that, to take a stand, again, especially in this environment where there's so much out there and it's so easy for people to hide behind a keyboard and be critical. How tough is that?
The keyboard warriors, right?
Right.
Keyboard warriors. Again, I think we're a microcosm of society. It doesn't take a research rocket scientist to figure out that the Catholic Church, and really, quite frankly, most churches, are struggling with weekly attendance, right, in terms of participation. So our mission statement says we work in partnership with the parish and the parents. That's a key piece. Our mission says we work in partnership with parents and the parish. Unfortunately, what we see in our community of Roncalli, which again is a microcosm of the country, you have fewer and fewer families that are going to mass or church on a consistent basis. And so the message they're hearing at school isn't always being reinforced at home. And so that can be challenging. Now it puts that young student in a real quandary because sometimes what they're hearing at school is either not being reinforced at home or might even be conflicted at home. And so I tell people all the time, our theology teachers have the toughest job in the building for sure. But we're winning the battle. I'm pretty confident about that. I think we're producing young, energetic, faith-filled young people who are making a difference in the world. But the family, Pope John Paul II used to say, so goes the family, so goes the world. Mm-hmm. I think that's such a profound statement. So goes the family, so goes the world. And I would be this, if I can pontificate for a minute. The challenge is that all of us have an education, public, private, parochial, it doesn't make any difference. So many of our challenges can be traced back to the home. If the home's not going to place a high value on education, if the home's not going to place a high value on discipline, if the home's not going to place a high value on hard work, then it's going to be really hard for the school to make up for that.
You mentioned a minute ago the importance of Catholic education in the educational mix, and it made me think about Dan Elsner, the president at Marian University, and his, the amazing job, frankly, that he has done at that school, which at one time, as he took over, was close to bankruptcy. Closing. They were in real trouble, and he has done just such an amazing job. But he makes the case that every great American city needs a strong Catholic institution, and I guess that kind of feeds in with what you're talking at the secondary level. But what has the resurgence and the elevation, I guess you could say, of Marian University as a Catholic institution, has that impacted your students in terms of pathways beyond high school?
I think a couple of thoughts there too would be, number one, Dan's probably been one of, if not my biggest mentor. When he came into town years ago as our superintendent for Catholic schools in the Archdiocese, I remember the first one or two meetings that we had with Dan. It was very clear that this was a results-driven man that was going to hold you accountable for your actions, which is absolutely what we need. So he's been a great mentor for me, and I think for many others within the Catholic school circles. The answer to your question is yes. Seeing the transformational work that's been done at Marian, I think, has had a really good trickle-down effect on Roncalli and on the Archdiocese. Dan is he's not bashful at all in standing up and saying just exactly what he said. Every great American city needs a great Catholic university. I would go so far as to say every great American city needs great, strong Catholic schools. Again, just simply to provide options for people. We do not exist. I don't see us to be in competition with public education. I see us as an option for people who are looking for a faith-based education. And our country needs, as I've said before, our country needs strong public schools, strong private schools, strong faith-based schools, strong online schools, strong home schools. Dan's been a great asset for the Archdiocese. I think he's been a great asset for the city and a great asset for the state. The work they're doing is just absolutely mind-boggling, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I was on Marion's campus. I'm a Butler grad, but I was on the Marion campus a lot in the late 70s, early 80s, because that's where many of my friends went. And that school was on its deathbed. As you mentioned, it was literally on its deathbed. And you look at it now today, it's absolutely thriving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. In terms of the business side of education, certainly your lifeblood, you want to get good students in there, recruit good, top teachers, top students. That recruiting process in the enrollment piece and the role that vouchers play. Indiana, a big voucher state, right? I think I read recently where the numbers for vouchers up over 70,000, I think, which is a record. How does that impact you at Roncalli and Catholic education in general? Has that voucher system been a positive?
Well, another great question, Gary. Very, very good question. I want to go back and say, I think at the core of my answer is, and some people are going to agree with this, some people disagree, is how do we define public? I think many people who exist in the public education world, and I don't mean this in a critical way, government schools, they view public as simply public schools. I view public as the public, the entire state of Indiana, the public includes everybody. So I go back to some parents are going to choose to homeschool. Some are going to do online school these days. For us, some people want a faith-based school. We have 14 Catholic parishes in the South Indiana. We have 10 Catholic feeder schools that feed into us. So people used to always say, well, the Catholic schools recruit. And I would say, absolutely, we do. We recruit those 10 schools as aggressively as we can. That's our lifeblood.
Yeah.
And so we recruit them aggressively. For us, we get about 86%. And that number has stayed consistent for almost 25 years. 86 to 88% of our kids will come from those 10 feeder schools. The other 10 to 12%, which annually that would be about 20 to 25 kids, they come from a smattering. Homeschool kids, Southport, Center Grove, Franklin Central, Greenwood, Whiteland, Southport Presbyterian, Calvary Lutheran, come from all over the place. But to the question of school choice scholarships, certainly that's been a key piece of the puzzle. I go back to how you define public. I think public's the whole state. And I think parents have the right to choose where they want their child educated. Early on, I've been a part of this I'll say fight for school choice scholarships for a long time. And I got frustrated early on at one meeting where it was, pretty much public school officials, where they kept using the word, those are our kids, those are our kids. And I said, those kids belong to one people only, and that's their parents. Just because their zip code has them placed in your school district doesn't mean they're your kids. Those kids are their parents' kids, and their parents will decide where they're going to be educated: homeschool, online school, faith-based school, public school. So I believe strongly in school choice. For us, it's been certainly a positive. The demographics of our community have changed a little bit over the last 10 to 15 years. I think we've always been middle class with what I used to tell people, a tinge of upper middle class and a tinge of lower middle class. That's pretty much our socioeconomic mix. I would say over the last 10 to 15 years, still have a very strong middle class background, smaller upper class, and a larger lower socioeconomic class. And so the school choice scholarship's been critical for us.
Yeah. I think you kind of answered it there, but I was going to ask you how you respond to, how you push back, if you will, to opponents of choice, of vouchers who suggest it's taking away, siphoning dollars away from public education. How do you react to that?
I think there's a couple thoughts. Number one, it has no effect on property taxes, which they get a substantial amount of their money from property taxes. So that family that chooses Roncalli is still paying property taxes, which still goes straight to that public school. Number two, if they're not educating the child, why should they get the money? I mean, that would be a key piece of the tough puzzle for me. And again, you have to remember the school choice scholarship is paying 90% of what that public school would get for that child. So there's still 10% that's going to the state. We're not getting the whole 100%. Third thing I would say is, if they're struggling with money so much, how come I see $12 million tennis courts and $5 million basketball courts? And I mean, their facilities, God bless them, are good. Now, again, that's a kind of a thorn in my side. One of our key things to me is, does it affect teaching and learning? If it affects teaching and learning, it's important and we need to do it. I think all these massive facilities that we see at high schools, small colleges, it's just an arms race that I don't think has impacted teaching and learning. So I think one of the key issues is, and I'm not well versed on public school funding, so I have to be careful. That's not my specialty. But I do understand they have different pots of money from which they can, those pots are assigned specific places. I don't think the issue is they don't have enough money. I think the issue is they don't have flexibility to move that money around.
Interesting take. Much more ahead with Chuck Weisenbach. He's the president at Roncalli High School here in Indianapolis. We'll talk about his path to the president's office there. Also, the moment that changed his life a number of years ago, and also what's next. That's when the Business and Beyond podcast returns. Stay with us.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
And welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast. We're presented by PNC. My guest this week is Chuck Weisenbach. He is the president at Roncalli High School. Been talking about Catholic education, education in general, and Chuck certainly has opinions on all of that and a lot more. And Chuck, we mentioned in the first part of the podcast that you grew up in the shadow of Roncalli, and I know in doing a little research, there was a moment that really you say changed your life, changed your trajectory. And I believe, if I remember right, is as you were entering, or maybe you were in 8th grade at Southport, or about to enter high school. Talk about that.
Well, again, I go back to the history of the school. In the 60s, I come from a family of 10, and we all obviously grew up right next door to the school. So my oldest siblings went to Chartrand and graduated from Chartrand. And then when the merger happened in 69, it was not a pleasant time for anyone. It was very challenging, as I think most people that have been affiliated with mergers know. Very tense. And bottom line is, my parents weren't happy with the way things played out. So they pulled my siblings. I had a brother that was in the senior class at what would be Roncalli the next year. I had a brother in the junior class, a brother in the freshman class. They pulled them all out and moved them to Southport High School. Perry Meridian did not exist at that time. So they moved them to Southport. They all graduated from Southport. And I think they would tell you they had a good experience at Southport. And so it came time for me in my 8th grade year. It was the springtime. And the counselor from Southport came over to our school, St. Jude. Imagine that, public school person inside the Catholic school, and kind of helped register the handful of us that were heading to Southport. So I went through that process, and I just went home after there was something tugging in my heart. And so I went home with my parents, and I asked them one day, is there any way I could go to Roncalli? And they said yes to that. And so I'm sure I would have found success at Southport. I'm confident of that. But the education, the faith formation, the experience I got at Roncalli truly changed my life.
Yeah, in terms of change, as you think back or reflect back, and obviously everything has changed. Everything changes over the years, and certainly our culture, all kinds of things have changed. Education has changed. What, in your view, is there one thing you can pinpoint as you reflect back to when you were being educated and now as an educator for many years? Maybe the biggest change as it reflects to Catholic education or education in general in Indiana?
I think education in general, Gary, and this is, I think there's others, but let's face it. When you and I were in school and we got in trouble, we knew darn sure well when we got home, we were in double trouble.
Right.
There wasn't going to be questioning of the teacher. There wasn't going to be a questioning of the dean of students. There wasn't going to be a questioning of the principal. The facts were on the table. You screwed up and your butt was going to be on the ringer.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's not the case today. And I think that probably plays out in all schools, public, parochial, faith-based schools. Now when the dean of school calls and wants to say little Johnny's in trouble, they want to go after the teacher. They want to go after the coach. They want to go after the counselor. And there's that lack of accountability, because it's through that process that you grow. It's through that process you begin to understand, I did make a mistake. How do I learn from that mistake? How do I grow from that mistake? And unfortunately, today's parents are trying to shelter their children. The way we try to say it here, Gary, is this: are we trying to prepare the child for the path, or are we trying to prepare the path for the child? If you're going to try and prepare the path for the child, they're never going to learn. They're going to be 25 years old and still trying to figure out, how do I overcome adversity? What we're trying to do is prepare the child for the path ahead. And again, I hate to, certainly it sounds like I'm bashing on families. I'm not. We have great, great families, and I respect that. But I do think that's one significant change in terms of now kids are not being held accountable for their actions.
Yeah. In terms of that career path, that's certainly changed as well. I know we do stories around workforce, obviously a lot. Talent is such a big issue in Indiana and all over the country. As you look at how that has changed, that path beyond Roncalli, which maybe at one time the ultimate goal for everyone was a 4-year college or university, but now it's that, but it could be a 2-year technical training, associate degrees, all kinds of things that are out there. How has that changed how you deliver education to students?
Gary, you do your homework so well. I always appreciate that every week. So it's a great question again. I tell people this. I say we kind of drank the same Kool-Aid everybody drank back in I'd say the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, where it was college. And you know what? If your kid wasn't going to college, my God, how are they going to ever make it in society? We kind of drank that Kool-Aid. And I would say 10 to 12 years ago, at least, we started to wake up here and say, not every child that's in our school is going to be best served by going to a 4-year school. That's not where that's not the gifts that God's given them. They may be a great electrician, might be a great plumber, a great welder. So we really started to get very aggressive at trying to break that mindset here. And it resonated with kids pretty quickly, right? Because that kid sitting in the city, you know what? I didn't like school in 6th grade, and I still don't like school in the 10th grade. It's not a place where I find a lot of success. So yeah, if you're going to let me go work on carpentry during the school day, amen. So it resonated with kids pretty quickly. We had a harder time with the parents who, again, I think still had that mindset. If my kid doesn't go to college, I'm a failure. So the good news is we've turned the corner there. For faith-based schools in the state of Indiana, we lead the way with internship programs. We've got internship programs with electrical HVAC companies, medical companies, Greenwood Airport. So we're proud about that, but we're trying to be even more aggressive because, as you said, the path for this, what this state needs is good, strong workers who can be contributors to society.
Yeah. So, and kind of along that thought process, the role of partnerships and your connection to business and industry in the community, I'm sure is probably bigger and better now than it's ever been, and more important maybe.
Absolutely. So the challenge for the last couple of years under the current regulations is a lot of people wanted to partner with us, but it had to lead to some type of accreditation or licensure, right? With the new pathways that are being laid out for the DOE that we think will be implemented here in December, right, for next year's freshman class. I think that's going to be loosened up a little bit. So the partnerships are going to become even more critical moving forward. I'm excited about that. I'm concerned for the whole state in terms of, will there be enough businesses out there who want to partner with us, right? And will there be enough places for the kids that want to partner? So I like the idea conceptually. I do have concerns whether or not it's going to play out the way we want it to.
So you're saying the schools are all in on this. You got to have the business community. You got to have that side of the equation maybe a little more connected.
Exactly. And transportation, if I'm Ben Davis High School and I've got 1,200 kids that want to do internships, where do I find 1,200 internships? How do I get them to those places too? So again, conceptually, I like it. I still think we're going to have some challenges playing it out.
Talked earlier about accountability, and this is kind of a more 50,000-foot view question for you. But, there's talk now at the national level, President-elect talking about disbanding the Department of Education at the federal level and, I guess, sending it back to the states. Any just kind of top-line thoughts on that, whether that's a good idea or how you think that might play out?
Great question, Gary. We just had our principal, Kevin Bonish, and I just sat down a little bit yesterday and we're having a little conversation. I can't say that I speak from a point of great reading and reference yet on that. So I can't say that I have a firm idea on that. We asked ourselves the question, what is the United States Department of Ed doing for Roncalli right now? And I can't answer in great detail. I don't know. I would say, obviously, I think anytime we can streamline government and get it back to its lowest form of accountability, whether that's state or local, typically I think that's best for our country and best for productivity. So I would be very open to the idea as to whether or not that is needed, the United States Department of Ed is needed or not. But again, I can't say that I've done a great deal of reading and research on it.
Final question for you, and you talked about strategic planning earlier in the podcast. As you look at the next several years, maybe the next 3 to 5 or 5 to 10 years, what's your vision? What do you envision Roncalli becoming?
So we just this past week, our principal, Kevin Bonitz, came back from Washington, where we were the recipients of the Blue Ribbon School of Excellence from the United States Department of Ed. So I guess they have done that for us. We appreciate that. We're one of only about 20 high schools in the country that have won the Blue Ribbon School of Excellence 4 times, one of only 2 in the entire state of Indiana. So I think looking forward, we've invested about $40 million in our campus over the last 30 years, but we still have pieces of our campus that are original in 1962 that have not been renovated, haven't been updated. So we still have facility needs. I know, again, facilities, that I already said, don't make or break education, but we do have some facilities that are aging and need attention. This whole, where are we going in the state of Indiana with the diploma, is going to create some challenges. So I think strategically, we have to be thinking about those partnerships and how do we maximize those partnership opportunities for our kids. And then thirdly, certainly, how do we continue to be a faith-based focused institution that can develop good young people who are going to be productive members of society, and preferably for us, continue to be members of the church.
Chuck Weisenbach, the longtime principal and now the president. And he's been the president for 4 years now at Roncalli High School. Chuck, really appreciate you taking the time to join me. And thank you for all you do for education, not just there at Roncalli, but education in general. We certainly need a lot more people like you in the education field. Thanks for all you do, and I hope to see you soon.
Gary, thanks again to you and your team for your great work. Thank you.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast. We are a weekly conversation with leaders, achievers in business, sports, academia, and a lot more. We're presented by PNC on a weekly basis. And you can check out all of our episodes, nearly 200 episodes now of the Business and Beyond podcast, and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.